This is the first time I've given this talk. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. It's a topic that's pretty close to my heart. I think it's very important, and it's shaping the way that our industry is going as a whole. So yes, so I'm Avleen Vig. I work for Etsy. A little bit about Etsy. We have 40 million members, so we've grown quite a bit. I remember when I joined, we had, I want to say around 10 million or something about 4 years ago. So grown quite a bit. We have 1 million active sellers on the site. We have sales in pretty much every country in the world. I've seen the last time I gave this number, somebody said, there's only 195 countries in the world, how can you have 200? So depending on how you count the number of countries, basically every country in the world. And we have somewhere between 50 and 70 code deploys a day. So we iterate very quickly on the site. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, give a little bit of background on remote engineering, and then hopefully we can go over some things to see how we can make it successful. So hi, I'm Av. Everyone calls me Av. I work from home. I've been working from home since about 2009 in various parts of the world. I'm a staff operations engineer at Etsy. I spend most of the day breaking the site when I shouldn't and getting in trouble for it. But things go all right. And I like cats. This is a cat. I've lived in London, Portland, Arkansas, and now in Grand Rapids. And at all these places I've worked remotely. Sometimes for small companies, sometimes for slightly bigger companies. The last 4 years have been working for Etsy. We've grown during that time from a company of about 100 to 150 people to I think about 650 people now. And we have quite a few remote employees. So why am I here? As I said, I think things are changing in our industry, and they're changing very quickly, a lot more quickly than people expected. There are companies like, the big companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Apple. They're in all of the major metropolitan areas where there is a lot of technical talent, and they're just kind of sucking it all up, and there's not a lot of talent left. Our headquarters are in Brooklyn, New York, and we have a really hard time hiring people. It's very difficult. And I can imagine even in a town like Grand Rapids, I haven't had to hire anybody in Grand Rapids, but I can imagine it's difficult even here. Fortunately, talent just kind of exists everywhere. It's not located in any one place or just a few places. And a lot of companies are realizing that, yeah, we can hire remotely, we can do this, but there are challenges that come up with doing this. And I want to see remote engineering become just sort of the default choice when we hire. It shouldn't be, well, are we going to hire somebody in the office? Can they, can we relocate them? It shouldn't matter. It should be, where's the talent? Where can we find people? Let's figure out how to make that work. And I think it's very possible. So when I tell people that I work at home, the very first thing I hear is, oh, you have it so easy. You're lucky. This is great. You get to do whatever you want. It's not a problem. So let me ask, first of all, before I go any further, how many people here have actually worked remotely or worked for a company far away? Okay, so actually a good number of people. That's good. So like you guys will understand like some of these challenges and things. And there are a lot. It's difficult, especially if you're doing it for the first time, or the company that you're working for is trying to do it for the first time. It's a whole lot of things that we need to overcome. It's basically like learning a new skill set. That's kind of the way I look at it. And these are just some of the things that come up, and I'll go over these in a moment. But there are a lot of benefits as well. A study was done 2 years ago that found that if everybody in the country worked from home for just 1 day a week, there'd be a national savings of about $700 billion. That's in travel costs, food expenses, office costs, all kinds of things. And that's a lot of money that could potentially just come back into people's pockets, and we'd be able to spend them. Little stat that most people don't seem to know, about 3% of the federal government telecommutes. I had no idea. I found out as I was researching for this talk. So it's a thing. It's a thing that happens in many industries, and it's happening more in ours. A nice side effect of working with people who are in a lot of different locations. On the operations team at Etsy, we have, I want to say, about 9 people, and more than half of us are remote. We have people in the UK, we have people in San Francisco, I'm here in Grand Rapids, and people just travel a lot. People are always moving around. And it's nice having people from a variety of different backgrounds. I would say that if we had all been in New York, we would all tend to have very similar mindsets, and having people, being able to work with people from a lot of different sort of environments, a lot of different backgrounds has really helped improve the quality of our work. Different ideas tend to come forward and so on. Here's another picture of a cat, the same cat. I like cats. But who hires remotes? This is the second most common thing I hear after you have it so easy when you work at home. Who hires remotes? If I want to get a job as a remote engineer, where do I turn to? And most of the time I recommend people talk to startups, a lot of tech companies. These are mostly companies who are based in the Northeast. Puppet Labs is based out in Portland. But there are tons and tons of them. They exist everywhere, and as I said, more of these are starting to happen. Larger companies are starting to look at it as well now. Some of the financial industry is starting to accept that this is also becoming a thing. People, not just in technology, want to work remotely. So I wouldn't say that it's limited to any one type of company, but it does seem to be more prominent right now with sort of our industry, which is cool. Some more numbers. In the US, 3.3 million people work primarily from home. That's about 2.8% of the population, of the working population in the US. That's quite a lot. And most of them work at companies with larger than 100 people. There seems to be a strange sort of gap in the middle of these stats. A lot of startups which are less than sort of 10 people will hire remote engineers. And then they'll start getting a lot of people in the local area who get interested with this cool new thing that started up. And then after they get to about 100 people, they're like, oh yeah, we can start hiring more remote people. So for some reason, there's a bit of a split in the middle. But most companies where people work remotely seem to be over 100 people. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. Companies want people who have remote experience if they're going to hire them for a remote position. But you can't get that position unless you have the experience. And how do you get the experience if you don't get the position? It's not like you can buy it. I also play World of Warcraft sometimes. So you need to kind of get into it somehow. And really there are two avenues. And I've done both of these, and they both work very well. The first is find a company who's willing to take a shot. When I worked in London about 6 years ago, I worked at a small company who was willing to, take me on because I was the only operations engineer they could find. They had been looking forever, trying to find somebody who could do this work. And they just hadn't been able to find anybody for the right price, anybody who was local. And eventually, through some contacts, they said, hey, can you help us? We're willing to do anything. And I said, well, I'm about to leave London, so you're going to have to let me go wherever I want if you want me to work for you. And they're like, okay, we'll do it, anything. And it worked out. The second was when I went back to London. I worked at another startup, and this happened sort of right as the recession hit at the end of 2008, 2009. It was a pretty rough time, and I just lost one job because of the downturn, and I was making probably half as much money as most people had been at that point. But it was a job, so I took it. And London's incredibly expensive. My family was in Portland, and it was horrible. So after working there about 6 months, I told my manager that I needed to go back home, that it was too difficult trying to afford to fly back and forth. And again, they were pretty good. I'd built up a relationship at that point, and they'd seen the quality of my work, and they were like, yeah, this could work. You know what you're doing. It's not like we're taking a complete shot in the dark. And both of those, from other people who I've seen who work remotely, people say those two things work very well. And the latter works the best. Like if you're really interested in working remote, going in somewhere first, getting established, building up a reputation for good, solid work helps a lot. A lot of the challenges that we face are definitely cultural. There are technological challenges as well, but I think the majority of them really are very cultural and in the way that we do our work. So you need to basically take what you need to do, you have to make it happen yourself. My life as a remote engineer comes down to about 3 things, I think. And they can kind of broadly be broken down as communication, discipline, and balance. And communication is so important. I don't think it's very easy to say, hey, this is a big deal. You know, you have to learn to communicate. But I want to illustrate this with a game. And before I start, I want to thank you all for volunteering for this game, because we're all going to do it together. This is a game that we play at Etsy. We do it probably once or twice a year. And I'm going to start, and we're going to go around the room. Let's see how we're going to do this. We'll start with you, sir, and we'll go there to the back, and then sort of kind of wiggle through the line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word, and then I'd like everybody else to help develop the sentence. And we'll just go, and we'll see what we come up with at the end. So, if everyone's ready? I
am a engineer who likes to
Design.
software. I will. What did you say?
Pizzas.
Will add.
One more word.
Cheese.
Cheese, excellent. I'm a software engineer. I like to design pizzas. I will add cheese. Okay. So that took us, I was looking at the counter, I think that took us about 45, 50 seconds to do that. That was pretty good. And we do this is a silly exercise, but we do it repeatedly because we want to develop our communication skills. And it's one of the things that is really, really important to do. And not only does it just help us talk and make up funny sentences, but the more we do this, the more we practice how each of us thinks and talks and communicates, it helps us understand how each of us works. And when you're working remotely, you don't always have the ability to see who you're working with. So you can't necessarily respond to physical gestures or expressions or emotions. You have to kind of be able to intuit what's about to happen next. And little games like this are some of the things that we do that really help us. Like I said, we play this game about twice a year. We do it in person first. And we use IRC very, very heavily at Etsy. I know a lot of other companies use Slack, HipChat, Skype, whatever it is you're using. We do it in person first, and then we try and do it as a list of people in our chat room. And it's crazy, but it ends up taking about 4 or 5 times longer when we're typing it. And you know, I was pointing to people as I was going, saying, okay, it's your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn, your turn. And you kind of don't have that. And if you're dealing with time-sensitive issues or communication that needs to happen quickly, especially if you have some sort of text-based medium that you're trying to communicate over, it's difficult. So these exercises help. I like to encourage the idea of communicating as remote by default. And what I mean by that is, if you're in an office with people, such as this office, a great office, you can walk over, talk to people, that's wonderful. What do you do if somebody's working from home that day? If you don't practice talking to them through some other medium, regardless of whether they're in the office with you or not, you lose something. You lose the ability to let people work efficiently from home, and you definitely lose the ability to have effective remote engineers. So whenever we have new hires at Etsy, we always try to encourage them to use the same communications methods that everyone has, primarily IRC, then falling back to email and other things. And it works pretty well. So, this is just a few moments of a little chat at Etsy. Let's see. But yeah, I know, like I said, I know a lot of people, HipChat is very popular. Slack is another thing that's gaining a lot of traction right now. It's very cool. We treat most of our communications as asynchronous. So the idea is, if you're trying to talk to somebody, leave a message for them, they'll get back to you eventually. If it's important, the best thing to do is just pick up the phone and call them. And every time I say that, it sounds wrong in my head. I'm not sure why. I think I've just been kind of conditioned to typing a message to somebody or IMing them and expecting a response back quickly. But it's as simple as that. This is something that we try and develop a lot at work. Talking to your manager. How many people here have one-on-ones with their manager? Oh, why is not every hand up? So I have 3 one-on-ones with my manager every week, and it sounds really excessive, but it's the only time that I really get to talk to him. I may send him a couple of messages or an email or a, hey, can you please approve my expense report thing, like, once a week, but that's not really having a conversation with him. If I was in the office, I'd probably, I shouldn't, but I'd probably turn around and talk to him much more during the day, maybe see him over lunch, but we don't get to do that. So I have usually 2 or 3 one-on-ones with him a week. He commutes to Brooklyn from New Jersey, and if anyone knows the geography of that area, that's a really long way. It takes him about 2 hours every day to commute to and from work. It's a really, really long way. The nice thing is it gives him a lot of time to talk to me. So he calls me on his way home a few times a week, and we have a lot of really good conversations. He always fills me in on what's going on in the office, who's doing what work's happening, what was discussed during the day, if there's anything I missed. Usually I hear about a lot of stuff, but there's definitely stuff that he's able to fill in and let me know what's going on. He tells me what his concerns are with projects and work and tickets that need to be done and so on. And I get to do the same back. I express to him, I'm feeling left out, or I wish I had a vacation right now and I was, going off somewhere. And that time is incredibly valuable. You definitely need more of it if you're a remote engineer. A lot of managers are already really busy and just don't want to do that, don't have the time to do that. But I insist on it. It's the only way. Otherwise, I'm just kind of left dangling there and I don't know what's going on. The second of those things, discipline. This is kind of a fun one. Discipline affects not just your work and the work that you're doing, but sort of your environment, your schedule, and distractions that you have around you. And my God, I have a lot of distractions around me. This is not my desk. This is a photo that I found on Flickr. But my desk used to look like this for a long time, and it's just one big distraction all around me. And working in an environment where, if you're in an office, a lot of your distractions are other people and people coming up to you, talking to you, wanting information from you, wanting your help with something, wanting to, get an update on what's going on. You don't have that necessarily as much if you're working remotely. You can, but usually you don't have as much of it. And so your brain kind of picks up on distractions that are around you, and a messy desk is the first thing that it'll stick to. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but just tidying up my desk frees up my ability to do a lot more effective work. Schedules. I love this one. So when I started out as a remote engineer, my schedule actually looked very, very much like this. I would wake up, I'd sit around, I wouldn't necessarily do a whole lot, just kind of lounge around, I'd watch some TV. At some point I'd decide to have some breakfast, watch some more TV, get some lunch. Okay, I know there's some stuff I have to get done today. Okay, I'll work for a little bit. Then, cat jumps in my lap, and I pay attention to him, put him down, go put my dishes away in the sink, walk past the laundry room, see I have laundry to do, and then I got to do my laundry, and it just piles on and on and on. And eventually, maybe 6 o'clock, I stop being distracted, get back to work, do another 4 hours of work. Now it's 10 o'clock at night. I haven't had any downtime. I'm exhausted, and I just want to just stop for the whole day. And it's terrible. It really, really drains you. So I think after about 6 months of working remotely, the first time I did it, I decided I definitely needed some more structure in my life. So this is not my schedule. I'm gonna not lie about this. This is not exactly what I do, but it's close. On days when I wake up at 9 o'clock, I do generally follow this timeline. If I've had a long night, or if I was on call and I got woken up for like 2 hours in the middle of the night and instead I sleep in until 10, everything gets pushed forward about an hour. There are some days, things are easier, some days they're more difficult, but having this structure really enables me to know what's coming up next and to plan what I need to get done much better. Lunchtime is my favorite time. I get to play with the cat. Her name's Banjo, and she's scary. Not my cat, by the way. Don't be a black box. I see this happen a lot, and this happens mostly at small startups, small companies who have a lot to do, Usually, you know, again, that smaller group where there are 10 people or less, where somebody just wants to give you a piece of work to do and expect that you're just going to get it done and then move on to the next thing. With kind of the idea being that you're not going to have to go distract a lot of people, you're not going to have to talk to a lot of people, which is the problem if you're remote. If you're in the office and you still have those human interactions, that's one thing, that's fine. But if you don't, if you're constantly just isolated from everybody else when you're trying to do your work, it just gets depressing after a while, because all you see is these things come in. Maybe there's an email saying, hey, can you get this done by tomorrow? We're all going out for a beer now. See you later. It's really kind of sad. So don't be a black box. It really does mean you do have to talk to other people. And some of these costs with interruptions, these costs with needing to talk to people more, need to be sort of accepted up front. If you're a company who's going to hire an engineer, you need to know that these things are going to happen, and they need to happen in order for people to be successful. I've led a number of very, very large projects as a remote engineer. When I started out, people were very hesitant to let me do big work. They wanted it all to happen in teams, locally. I worked for tech companies out in Silicon Valley, and that attitude is very pervasive out there. Yahoo is a great example. Yahoo used to have a lot of remote engineers. They used to be scattered throughout the country, and they did amazing work. They did wonderful things. And then I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little more, they changed their policy and said, no more remote offices. We're closing all of them. Everybody moved to California. Like, I wouldn't want to move to California. I live there. I don't want to go back. But there's no reason why people cannot lead large, successful projects. I just finished one that lasted about 15 months. And it was huge, saved the company a ton of money. But it needs the trust of management that if you have somebody who you've hired to do the job, you have to let them do the job. A great saying I heard a couple of weeks ago was that a great remote engineer is better than an okay local engineer. And an excellent engineer is just an excellent engineer. It doesn't matter where they are. They can be local, they can be remote. You know, they're just going to be excellent, so you have to trust what they do. Balance, you know, this is kind of like a work-life balance thing. People talk about it all the time. You know, if you've ever had a meeting with an HR person, like, you gotta take your vacation. It's true, it's really true. I went almost 4 years without taking a vacation, and I just took one. I banked up like 3 weeks worth of time, and I took 3 weeks off in October. I had a huge list of things that I wanted to do around the house. I wanted to build stuff. I was going to rewire things, and I spent 3 weeks doing nothing, and it felt great. So I'm now a very strong advocate for taking vacation. It'll make you feel better, and as a remote engineer, especially someone, you know, if you're working at home, there's this tendency to just work all day long. You may take lunch, you may not. You know, you'll get to start doing work maybe 9 or 10 in the morning. Maybe you'll finish 6 or 7 or 8 at night, and that wears you down over time. You really need that time to recharge, and it helps. Get a hobby. Again, sounds kind of silly. Like, hobbies are for kids. Why do I need a hobby? But it's true, it's really true. It's something that can distract you, take your mind off work, let you do other things. I like to build things. Ignore the cat. I'm sorry. I tried to look for a picture without a cat, and they all seem to be in them. This was a vegetable truck that I built when I lived in Arkansas, and it took me about 2 days to build it, because it was the first time I built anything big. But it was a lot of fun, and I didn't think about work the entire time. I also like taking pictures of things that go boom in the middle of the night. This is a photo of a storm, a pretty big storm that preceded a tornado going by about 2 miles away from us. So just stuff to take your mind off work. Tornadoes do that, so you know, it can be fun. Another important thing is travel. If you work for a company that does have an office somewhere, it's really important to be able to travel. And this is something I tell managers quite frequently. When you're hiring a remote person, into the budget for paying them, put in a little bit of money to let them come meet everybody in the office fairly regularly. At Etsy, our rule is that people who work remotely need to come to the office about once a quarter for at least a week, A lot of people go for about 2 weeks. I go every month for about 4 days. It's a little more than I necessarily may like to, but it's good because it really helps build a lot of social relationships. And when you go back home, when you're working, and you're talking to people, you're typing to them, you're sending emails, being able to understand what the other person is like, being able to connect to them and say, I know how this person thinks, I know what kind of person they are, we've shared beers together. It's a thing that really helps. And again, I know that's not necessarily for everybody. I know people think very differently. I'm a slightly more extroverted person. I don't have so much of a problem going up and talking to new people. But I've definitely worked with a lot of introverted people who aren't necessarily very keen on that, and understanding the people that you work with and how they're going to respond to the things you say to them when you're not in front of them can make a very big difference in your ability to get things done. Then there's a whole bunch of stuff that nobody tells you. Like, I think I like to say everything I've said up to this point is kind of common sense. It's maybe not, because I had to learn all of this myself and nobody taught me, but there's a lot of other stuff that really nobody tells you. The hardest lesson I learned was that I had to be my own tech support. I've had laptops and computers break all the time and not had anybody that I can just go to and say, hey, I'm really busy, can you fix this for me, or can you give me another machine for a little while? I just don't have time to deal with it. I had to do it myself. Fortunately, I'm an operations engineer. This is a lot of what I do every day, but it's something that takes time away from you. We had so most of the people at Etsy have Mac hardware, whether it's a laptop like this or a desktop or something. New version of OS X came out a couple months ago, I think, Yosemite, and there were a bunch of people, some of who do work remotely, who said, yeah, upgrade, did it on the first day, and immediately kernel panicked every time they booted up their laptop. No idea why. It turns out it was something that we were doing. We found a bug in the new version of OS X, which we reported to Apple, and we hope they've fixed it by now. But you basically end up having to be your own tech support. You have to do things yourself. You have to take your own backups. It's a simple thing. A lot of large companies have like corporate backup solutions and things like that. At home, I have a little hard drive I plug into my laptop once a day and let it back up. But little things like that. I bought a subscription to Amazon Prime just because I ended up buying so many things every year to help me get through it. And it's just little things like that. You don't think about them ahead of time when you're like, yeah, I could work from home, I could do this. In an office, you may have an infrastructure around to help you. Here, maybe not so much. About 18 months ago, we have a group at Etsy called Learning and Development, and their goal is to help us learn how to do our jobs more efficiently, how to deal with pretty much anything. It can be technical matters, often it's non-technical matters, leadership things come in there. And one of the things that they did for us was set up a conflict resolution class. And this sounds like one of those things, like the first time I heard it, it sounded like one of those things that big companies make you do that you don't really want to do, and you're just gonna, you're gonna be sitting there all day just being bored. It turns out it was incredibly helpful. Without realizing it, a lot of us interact with people, and a small thing can set off a reaction in the person you're talking to, and neither of you may necessarily realize it. For example, there was, so going back a few years, like before Etsy, there was a gentleman that I worked with who had this awesome habit of just throwing tickets at me all the time. Like, he'd be like, hey, can you get this done? Thanks. Can you get this other thing done? Thanks. Do you have time? I'm sorry, dude, I don't have any time. That's okay. Can you get this one little ticket done for me? Thanks. And he didn't realize that the way he was communicating with me was actually starting to get really aggravating, really tiring. And as a remote engineer, that it's even worse, because if one of you guys came up to me and said, hey, I need you to do something right now, drop everything you're doing, I'd be like, I'm in the middle of something. We can maybe have a discussion about it, and we could figure out like, how urgent is the thing that you need done? Can I find somebody else to help you do it? When you're a remote engineer, you don't necessarily have that luxury. And so conflict resolution isn't, you know, resolving things at the point before you go up and punch somebody. It's trying to deal with them much, much sooner. We have a little phrase, we use it at Etsy, being triggered. And the idea behind conflict resolution is when you feel triggered, when you feel immediately upset or angered or frustrated by something somebody said, it's really sort of the more reptile part of your brain responding to the way an interaction or an event has happened. And being able to catch that and deal with that and being able to actually tell somebody, hey, the thing you did just now was not okay, is big. It's just being able to have that discussion and say, hey, can we find another resolution to what you want me to do? And for a remote engineer, this is possibly one of the biggest things I can recommend that anybody try and do. It sounds like a weird kind of niche thing to do, but it makes a huge impact to your ability to communicate with others. And going back, you know, the travel thing and building social relationships, all of these things kind of tie in together. One of the things I do if anybody happens to follow me on Twitter or on Facebook or anything like that, I put a lot of smileys in my messages. And it's just a habit I've built up over time to express that I feel okay. What I'm saying is happy, is cool, you know. There are running jokes sometimes you hear, you know, you said something to me, I said something to you, I didn't see a smiley at the end of that. Were you serious? It's kind of a habit I do, and it's kind of gotten to the point where if I don't do that, people ask me if I'm feeling okay. Just little things to express emotion and to be able to tell people how you feel and that things are going all right are important. So those are things that engineers can do. Is anyone here a manager? Anyone manage people or have managed people? One, excellent. Sir, this entire section of the talk is for you. But no, seriously, these are things that you should take to your manager as well. Again, I mentioned before, regular one-on-ones and over-communicating are really, really important. The times when I've had managers communicate to me on a regular basis have been great, have been really wonderful. They've established relationships. They've helped me understand my work and what I need to get done. And the times when I haven't had that have just been frustrating. And you know, you can get through projects, you can get things done, but it's way too easy just to feel like you're forgotten and you don't know what to do next or where to go. The remote by default, both in terms of hiring, not worrying so much about where people are, but also the methods of communication. These are things that managers really should encourage their teams to do. The third point there, just yeah, it's kind of common. It's a thing we all hope. No one likes to be micromanaged. Well, actually, that's not true. I knew a person who did like to be micromanaged, and it was just weird. But most of us don't like to be micromanaged. Again, you know, just think about ways to encourage people. And I think being a remote engineer, a lot of these problems that could be small problems in an office seem more sort of blown up when you're remote, and they take on kind of a life of their own if you're not careful. And setting availability expectations. Does anyone here not work flexible hours? Excellent. Oh no, two people, I'm sorry. Yeah, when I worked in the finance industry, I didn't work flexible hours. I had to be there at 9:30. I got to leave at 5:30. And usually if I was in the office at 6 o'clock, there was something wrong and I'd usually get kicked out of the building. Again, kind of strange. But a lot of us have flexible working hours, and it's really nice, but it's also important to set expectations. Not just for managers to set expectations for when they can expect you to be doing work, but expectations for other people to know when they can reach you. If people need to get a hold of you, when can they expect a response to emails, IRC messages, phone calls, whatever it is. And setting sort of core working hours. It's sort of 11 to 3 is an example that I've seen used many times before. It's fairly common. That's very helpful. Managers also have a lot of influence on the business itself. It's very important, I think, when you're hiring, if you're hiring for a remote position, you really need to find people who can integrate very well with your team, even more so than if you're just hiring for a local office. You need people who can communicate effectively, who know what they're talking about and know how to express what they're thinking. you do need people who can just take a project and run with it, even if it seems like I'm kind of contradicting the point of working in isolation. You do need people who can take things, and when there's no one else around to talk to them, they can just run with it and get things done. Finding the travel budget for travel and things is very important. Pairing people is an interesting thing. I love pair programming. I don't always do it, but I think it's kind of fun when we do. At Etsy, we have a project, we call it doubles development, and it's sort of like a bug rotation theme. So member operations support, other groups will open up bugs saying, hey, there's this little thing happening on the site. It's affecting maybe 0.5% of the users, really tiny. Maybe it's a little bit bigger. But can somebody take a look at it? It's not like super critical, the site's not down or anything, but it's a bug. Can somebody take a poke? And so we bring that forward to our doubles development teams. And in this, we have 2 people paired up to solve a problem. Usually people who have no idea what the bug's about and probably no idea how to fix it, and they have to go find out. And it works really well. A lot of the times, when we do this and we have people who are remote, it works really well and surprising. Usually the day will go something like this. The people will get together, they'll have a kickoff call, maybe lasts about 15, 20 minutes. We're big enough now that I may not necessarily know who I'm going to be working with. I may not know the person, so a little introduction. And then we talk about kind of the bugs that we're going to be dealing with that day. Each pair of engineers gets a thing to solve. From there, we go off and we may chat for like another 30, 45 minutes. Some pairs talk all day long. They just keep like a Google Hangout open or something. They're just going back and forth. I personally, I like to talk for a little bit, establish who's going to be doing what. I have a lot of experience with databases, so if there's database knowledge that's needed there, something that's needed out of the DBs, I tend to take that stuff and I'll bring it back and we collaborate through the day multiple times, and at the end of the day, hopefully we've solved this bug. Usually kind of a small thing, again, like I said, it's not like the site is down, but it's a thing that helps people communicate and work together very effectively, and it works really well for remote people. Managers also influence people, of course, that's part of their role. And these are a lot of the things that my manager talks to me about when we have these one-on-ones. He wants to know how I'm feeling. Am I tired? Have I had a bad day? Why have I had a bad day? What's going on? And I worked, in a lot of companies where managers don't do this. A lot of the one-on-ones are just about, what have you produced today? What are you producing tomorrow? Why is it taking so long? What's blocking you? My manager asks me how my family's doing, how my kids are doing, how the wife's doing, how things are going in Grand Rapids, how's the weather today? We have these discussions that we would normally have in person if we were just sitting next to each other. And focusing a lot of time on these, it makes a big difference. And the last point there is kind of interesting. The whole time that I've been working remotely, I've had a family. Which means I've had a lot of distractions and interruptions around me, and that sometimes make it hard to get work done, and it's very difficult, certainly for my wife sometimes. And she told me something interesting about 6 months ago. She said, most of the time when you're sitting at your computer, we don't treat it as if you're working, because when we use our computers, we're on Facebook, on YouTube, we're playing games, we're browsing websites, reading the news. To us, sitting on a computer is different to you sitting on a computer. And when we see you sitting on a computer all day long, it's hard to figure out what it is you're doing. How is this work for you? If you went to an office and we didn't see you all day and then you came back, we'd be like, yeah, you're at work, no big deal. But seeing it happen in person is a thing. And this actually was a point of contention for us for a long time. We had a hard time trying to figure out why. So being a remote engineer has a huge impact on your family and your relationships with people. So it's important to think about that and be aware of these things that come up. Again, little things that people don't tell you. And finally, for managers and businesses as a whole, it's really important to invest in a really solid, a really good audiovisual setup, something for video conferences. they do cost money. And this is a lot of things, companies are trying to get by, they're trying to, generate business. Do you really want to spend a lot of money on this? If you have just 1 or 2 remote engineers, probably not. But when you get to a certain threshold, you do need to start thinking about making this investment because, again, it's something that aids in that communication and it aids in that productivity a lot. There are a lot of conversations that happen when you're not in the office. And it's important for managers to really advocate for your point of view. If you have a good manager and he's in a conversation and you're not, he should know how you think. So if a certain issue comes up and he knows that you disagree with it, he should be able to say, well, I think my guy would not necessarily agree with this. And if they're not able to do that, then you are going to miss out. So it is something that managers should be aware of. How many people here have dialed into a video conference meeting? Everyone, almost, probably, right? So I'm probably not the only. I'm probably not alone in having this experience where everybody in the room is talking, and you really want to say something, and you start talking, and nobody stops talking in the room, and you're just sitting there like, can I? No, stop! And it's very frustrating. For a while, I would just sit there like this with my hand up until somebody noticed. And if nobody did, I'd just start waving my hand wildly. And then somebody would pick up on it. Having somebody moderate meetings is just good practice for a meeting anyway, so you don't have people talking over everybody else. And it's almost required when you have remote people dialing into meetings. You need to be able to be aware that there are other people who want to talk and may have a hard time interjecting. So little things that make life easier. If you're hiring a remote engineer, if you're a company who is thinking about doing this or has done it, don't just have one engineer. Have a whole bunch of them. Have a team of remote engineers. Have a team working on a project where everybody is a remote engineer. It really enables them and gives them a lot of opportunity to get things done. If there's only one remote engineer, it is difficult for everybody else who is not remote to fall into that habit of using the same communication methods, breaking the habit of just turning around and talking to somebody who's a few seats down from you. And once you have more people in your organization who are remote, that kind of gets easier. So hire more of them, not less of them. As I mentioned, more than half of my particular team is remote. We have a senior engineers group who are, so the most senior engineers at Etsy, and more than 3/4 of that team is remote. So I'm not entirely sure if there's which way the cause and effect works here, whether being remote makes it easier for people to get promoted to be a senior engineer, or if people just get to be senior engineers and then just don't want to be in the office anymore. But there's definitely something there, and for us it works very well because now people need to talk to senior engineers fairly often. They have to use the same methods of communication as everybody else. Cabin fever is a real thing. It took me a long time to realize this. I'm not necessarily somebody who likes going outdoors. I'm quite happy if I'm just sitting indoors doing stuff all the time, mostly on my computer. But after a while, it does get really tiring. I broke my cabin fever. I ended up joining the YMCA, which, by the way, if anyone here hasn't gone, is awesome. And it's something that managers need to be aware of as well. How often are your remote engineers actually getting out of their working environment? If you ever speak to somebody who is a sleep doctor, they talk about something called sleep hygiene, which is the idea that your body should treat your bedroom as a place to get rest and a place to sleep. And similarly, people who spend a lot of time in their bedroom or in bed or have studio apartments, this kind of line for sleep hygiene gets blurred. They have a hard time sleeping. It leads to a lot of things like insomnia and so on. And cabin fever induced by lack of work hygiene or work environment hygiene is also a real thing. You need to be able to have a distinction between this is my place where I work, this is my place where I live, and I also need to be able to step outside and get out for a while. It's a very important thing for you to be able to do. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. I want to talk about some helpful tools. Is anybody here, is anyone here part of an on-call rotation? I am. One person. One person? Okay. You guys are all, the rest of you are all really lucky. I'm jealous. But we wrote a tool which we open sourced, I think back in June, called Ops Weekly. It was just something for us to use to communicate, for each engineer on the team to communicate with everybody else what they've been working on. And it's morphed into a lot more than that, since then. But it's also being used by a lot of other teams. A lot of our development teams use this as well. At its core, it's a very simple thing. You just type in what you've been doing as you go through the week, and you hit a button at the end of the week, and it just emails out like your list of things that you got done to your team. That in itself is helpful, because I can go back then and I can look and say, hey, this thing is broken right now. Let me see who the last person was that worked on it and what they did, because I think that something may have changed. It does more than that as well. It collects all of our monitoring alerts as well, and helps figure out like if a lot of our alerts are spurious, whether they're things that we can fix, things that we actually are ignoring and not really realizing how badly our systems are broken. We do have pretty much every development team at Etsy has an on-call rotation of some kind. They're either part, like engineers are either part of the general development on-call, or for example, our search teams, our payments teams, and other teams have their own dedicated on-call rotations where every engineer takes part. And a system like this really helps kind of figuring out what's going on. And this helps remotes especially because you can look back and have a history of what's going on without assuming that there may have been like in-person conversations that happened that you missed and so on. I mentioned we use IRC quite heavily. Slack, IRC, Cloud, HipChat, Campfire, all of these are real things. Very, very useful. Not just because it's fun to be able to type in a screen and not talk to people all the time when you're trying to get work done, but important to have a history of what's going on, a history that you can search through, especially if you do happen to get woken up or called by somebody in the middle of the night to deal with something and there's nobody else around you to call or wake up. These kinds of tools are very, very helpful.